here, Teatrality, the green line. It takes, I think, 20 minutes, not more than 20 minutes to get Halloween streets.
And then you spend like an hour or two there?
Even more, I think more, because it is very large landscape.
Are our passes only good for today to the different places, or can we use them today and tomorrow?
Tomorrow and on Sunday we have these 2 days for celebrating the birthday of Moscow, and in all the places, everywhere in Kolomensky also, there will be a lot of interesting events. So it is a very good idea to visit any historical places. You can do it tomorrow and the day after tomorrow.
I think these are only good today, right?
These tickets, yeah, this ticket is only for today.
Do they have the changing of the guard tomorrow? The mounted ceremony, the square tomorrow?
Probably, because last Saturday there was no this ceremony, because there's very specific festival of military orchestras. But I think tomorrow they will have the ceremony.
People must get there really early for it.
It's interesting.
We have a lot of in that part of China, there's so many Chinese tours here.
Because there are many people living in China.
Yeah,
comparison.
But I've never every place we go to.
Yeah, sure. But it's the same in all the countries.
Not in the U.S. No.
Where from?
Miami.
So it's probably too far for him to get to.
Yeah, and in New York there's not this many.
Because in European countries there are crowds of Chinese here everywhere.
In New York there's maybe one.
Every so
They have
often.
to have the whole city districts, Chinatowns. We don't have yet.
So do you think we could see like lots of the stuff in 4 days if we wanted to see the military hill with that museum and then the VDNK and that area, then UNESCO?
It's also very interesting because there's a park just next to it and the museum of military tanks, some military. Many interesting places in Moscow, but they're not close to each other, and that's why it's not very comfortable to take metro trains or buses or to get from one.
We're hoping we can do it all.
Actually, don't plan to look at everything. Just try to choose what you're interested in, historical places or something more.
They all take, you said, like 20 minutes to get to.
But the Golden Rings is really worth to be seen. Not only one place, at least a couple of places.
I don't know if we could see a couple in one day.
Try Vladimir and Suzdal.
What's Suzdal? No.
Suzdal.
Is that prettier than Circuit?
It's very touristic also, and they have many touristic facilities and a lot of small punches and guest houses and so on. Just next to Vladimir. Vladimir is the old capital. Next to это мои нагорные, да, пожалуйста. So show your tickets and follow. No, it's different. Sergei Posad is just a monastery, and Suzdal is the whole historical town, and there are a lot of small churches, small houses, and several monastery ensembles. It's a very large place.
Which is prettier or more picturesque?
I would recommend Vladimir and Suzdal in one trip. Well, so. Please, no photo inside.
No photo?
No photo here and no photo in other cathedrals. Well, I'm sorry, but photos are not allowed. Well, and you can have a look around. It is absolutely typical Russian Orthodox Church. In spite of the fact it was built by Italian master and the facades are absolutely Renaissance, the interior is typically Russian Orthodox. Well, it is rather small. Well, it was easy to warm it up. Well, and you see a lot of tombstones everywhere, so I think it's better to proceed to the left part, to the right part, I'm sorry.
Are these all bodies?
And I just explained.
Yes. How many people are buried here?
54.
Wow.
54, I've already said. 54 people are buried here, a lot of people are buried here. Well, and you see a lot of tombstones, 3 over here. Well, and the real bodies, dead bodies, the coffins with dead bodies are under the floor. What you see on the floor, these are just tombstones. Well, to mark where the bodies are. Well, and actually through the glass, for example, you see the original tombstones with inscriptions in Old Slavic, and this metal bronze encasements, they appeared only in the early 20th century during the restoration works. Well, originally these tombstones were of different size, of different design. Well, and you see that this cathedral is painted. It is very Orthodox tradition which came to Russia from Byzantine Empire. And for the first time, this cathedral was painted in the middle of the 16th century. It was built in the early 16th. In the middle of the 16th, it was painted for the first time. But what you see now, it is not the original painting. This painting was done in the second half of the 17th century. They just copied on paper the original frescoes and then repainted on the fresh plaster. And they kept all the original themes.
Same as it was with Britain.
And sure, because they were decrepit. By the middle of the 17th century, the first frescoes were decrepit and they wanted to renovate and they just kept all the subjects. Well, and sure, there are a lot of ideas how to paint and what to paint. And the main subjects are always in the upper parts. Because the upper part is closer to the heaven. It is the symbol of heaven. So on the walls there are representations of the main Christian holidays and events connected with the life of Jesus and so on. In the cupola there is the image of God. God Father, it is actually the Trinity. God Father with Jesus on his knees and the Holy Spirit as the white pigeon. Well, and on these pillars, you see massive pillars, and there are images of sands, different sands. And the idea was the pillars support the vaults, the sands support the faith. Sands are pillars of faith. So there is much symbolism, many ideas how to paint. And the wall painting is always connected with the name of the cathedral. This cathedral is devoted to Archangel Michael. And so on the walls there are deals of Archangel Michael. Sometimes it is not very easy to comprehend what are the deals of Archangel Michael. Because actually in the Bible book, in the New Testament, in the Old Testament, there are many cases when angels helped people. But in Orthodox tradition, all these cases ascribed to Archangel Michael. He, for example, helped apostles Peter and Paul get out of prison or something else. So these are deeds of Archangel Michael. But it is very interesting peculiarity of the wall painting in this particular cathedral. Have a look in the low part of the wall. The low part of the wall. It is the whole portrait gallery of those people who are buried here.
Oh.
Yeah. And just this first person, he was the real head of this principality, Moscow principality, in the early 14th century. His name was Ivan the Moneybag. He was nicknamed Moneybag for his financial policy, and his tombstone is just here. Then his son, eldest son, is buried here, and his portrait is over there. Well, later on, in the middle of the 16th century, under this tombstone, there is the burial place for Ivan the Terrible's brother. And his portrait, you see, the third person. Well, and these are not realistic portraits. These are rather conventional images, because till the time of Peter the Great, we never had this tradition of realistic portraits or landscapes, paintings, and so on. Well, these are just ideal rulers. But all of them, have a look, all of them are depicted with halos around their heads. They are not saints, indeed, but they are representatives of the God-chosen dynasty. The power is from God. And keep in mind that for the first time, the cathedral was painted in the middle of the 16th century by the order of Ivan the Terrible. Exactly. Ivan the Terrible commissioned this wall painting, and he was the first person who was Tsar, because his father's title was the Grand Prince. Ivan declared himself as the Tsar. The Tsar means Caesar, the Emperor, and he knew, Ivan the Terrible, he knew very well that all the Byzantine emperors, they were always depicted with halos around their heads, and he just wanted to emphasize that Russian Tsar succeeded to Byzantine emperors. Well, and it is very interesting. Have a look. You see this wall with icons in the size, 4 tiers of icons. Here could be 5. Well, and this wall with icon, it is called iconostasis. It is very typical Russian peculiarity. And this iconostasis divides this cathedral into 2 parts. This large part where all the believers are standing during the services. You know, we are standing, there are no benches. Our services are rather long, 2.5 approximately hours. We are very conservative, we are still standing. Well, and behind this iconostasis, there is the sanctuary with high altar, where the Holy Communion is prepared, and it is meant only for the priests. And initially, when we became Christians in the 10th century, in the 12th century, there was no this wall with icons. There were altar bearers, like in Catholic European churches, for example, and people could observe what was going on in the altar. But it happened in Russia that by the end of the 14th century, approximately, these altar bearers became much higher, and they looked like a wall. And then here we have iconostasis. And this iconostasis and the sanctuary behind it, they're always from the east. It is the east part. And this site, to the right of the iconostasis, it is the southern wall, it was always the most honorable place to be buried. Because the right side, right, not left, but right also for righteous, for good people. And you see a lot of burial places here. Almost all the people there wanted to be buried here. And Ivan the Terrible, he's also buried here, but just behind this iconostasis in the altar, because there was no empty place here by the second half of the 16th century. And here we have the burial place of Ivan the Terrible's father, Ivan the Terrible's grandfather and great-grandfather. So the whole dynasty, and Ivan the Terrible himself and 2 his sons, they are buried just behind these 2 icons. Well, the first Romanov Tsars, the Tsars from the 17th century, they are buried in the middle of this cathedral, because there was no empty place next to the southern wall. But there was one more wall, the northern one which was an honorable place to be buried, and there are only few tombstones, and you can have a look.
No. Yeah, that's something.
Was killed and domed, and actually he was not buried here. He was not buried here, yeah. Well, have a look. Just few tombstones. This one very wide for two people buried underneath. Well, and these are members of the royal family, but they were always in opposition to the real power. Some of them were imprisoned and died into prison. Some of them were beheaded, they were executed. Well, and it is very interesting idea. For example, here we have the tombstone for Ivan the Terrible's uncle. And here for Ivan the Terrible's cousin and his son. So Ivan the Terrible's relatives who were victims of this cruel policy of Ivan the Terrible. Well, one of the czars from the early 17th century, there was the time of troubles with the change of power, and all the czars were not popular. He is buried here, Vasily Shuisky. Well, and it is interesting, all of them, they are buried under one vault, in one church. But there are more honorable place and less honorable place. And now, have a look at this wall painting here on the western wall. According to tradition, on the western wall, there is always the composition of the Last Judgment. Actually, if you visit the main cathedral of the Assumption with your tickets, you will see this composition just in the center of the western wall, because it is the principle. When you go out of the church, you see this wall, you see the composition of the Last Judgment, and you have to decide for yourself how to live, what to do, good deals, bad deals, to find yourself in the paradise or in the hell. And in the upper part of this composition, do you see in the middle the image of Jesus, who is sitting on the throne and judging people? And below this image you see the table and this hand of God holding the balance. Do you see the balance with two scales? The scale of good, which is outweighing, and the scale of evil. And in the lower part of this composition, there is the strict division. To the right of Jesus, to the left of us, these are good people and their life in the paradise. And they're depicted nearer to that wall. And from the opposite side, you see this hell and this fire and this naked figure of the devil with the soul of Judah, the traitor, and all these people, they're buried just next to this fire. Again, it was not without reason. Yeah, because, for example, this on the northern wall, the first person, he is buried here, Ivan the Terrible's uncle. He is with the halos. He is a representative of the God-chosen dynasty. Yes. And the idea also, God himself on heaven, he will decide who was right, who was not right. So, because the medieval period lasted in Russia till the time of Peter the Great, till the end of the 17th century. So these are medieval ideas. And this cathedral is very interesting. And you can compare this interior with all the other churches, and you will see the same ideas. The same wall painting, the image of Jesus. Just in this cupola, you see the image of Archangel Michael, for example. In the central cupola, the image of Jesus. On the walls, there are always some events from the life of Jesus. On the pillars are always the images of saints, and the wall painting is connected with the name of the church. And on the western wall is always the composition of the Last Judgment. You can compare. Well, now you know the principles of the Orthodox churches. Well, and in fact, we have also, we can go around this pillar, we have these information lists with short information in different languages, and in all our churches and cathedrals we have the same, and you can get for yourself. No, photos are not allowed in our churches because of the frescoes. The light flash is not good for paint. So we're going out. Yes, there are good services here on memory days because there are some saints. For example, here there's one who shines well, on the day of Saint Archangel Michael, according to Orthodox calendar. Yeah, I just show you. Actually, you can turn the right.
Yeah?
Just go to the end of the street till the
Perfect.
wall.
How much time do you think it's gonna last to see
Just in
everything
3
in this?
minutes. Our tour will last will last 3 minutes more.
Okay.
And your way to the armory will last 5 minutes, 5 minutes then. Because I just everyone now.
What else is there to see in Vladimir? Your set of Suzel is very picturesque.
Yes, but they are close to each other. Vladimir